Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a privilege and honor for me to have the occasion to make this introduction at our Idaho Catholic Congress. I am the superintendent of Idaho schools, and I think the reason that I was honored to get to make this introduction is that this is very much related to education. We have with us a very distinguished gentleman, grew up in the Idaho area, in the Meridian, Nampa area, and he currently is, when he's not working on an international country or elsewhere, his home is now in Meridian, Idaho, or is it Nampa? Meridian. Adan de La Paz is well known throughout many countries, and we are very privileged that he is here to talk about 10 steps for teaching in multicultural classrooms. I have the pleasure of visiting with Adan earlier today, and he is a very interesting person. I'm sure you're going to enjoy him, so let's give him a big warm welcome for being back tonight.
Could you guys hear me? Let's get that a little higher. Up one more button. Go, okay. Can you hear me there? You guys hear me? No. Can't go any higher. How about now? No? Okay, let me use the mic. The hand mic. I think that's white. I think that's why they created those headset ones, because you really have to put these lapel ones really, really high to get a sound that's audible. So welcome, thank you guys for coming to my workshop today. I really appreciate you taking the time. This is your weekend. Okay, I know that as people that are professionals, anytime you have to do something on the weekend, it's asking you to go above and beyond. So thank you for doing that. Also, thank you from the standpoint that you are here because you obviously want to make a difference, and you care about students, care about youth, and you want to better serve them. Just so I have an understanding of the audience, raise your hand if you do work currently in the field of serving students in a school setting. Everybody, great. How about in the classroom? How many teachers do we have? Or do we have any administrators? Great. So the bulk of what I see is people that are in the classroom, as I say, in the trenches. A little bit more about me. I love to teach. You'll see that I have my own business, but I'm always going to call myself a teacher no matter what, because that's what I love to do. It just so happens that I was given an opportunity to go abroad, ended up staying there for about 7 years, and came back. If you knew my family, the obvious reason is for my son. This is our home. We wanted our son, my wife and I, to have him grow up here in a nice area. We were recently in Hong Kong as our last place. It's hard to raise a child in Hong Kong when there's so many people and it's so densely populated. It's a great experience, obviously, so you can learn about cultures and language and all those sort of things, but we wanted to be back home. So, with that said, I want us to look here at laying the groundwork for this presentation. So, I have the question here, what makes a great teacher? We're going to get into the steps, believe me, and a disclaimer. A lot of times I'll have people that I get down and they go, they don't say this, but essentially they're saying, I didn't get the silver bullet. How do I fix this problem? Or what do I need to do to make sure that this doesn't happen? Or can't you just give it to me a nice package with a bow? And the reality is, and many of you know that doesn't exist. And we only have an hour and 15 minutes to save the world. So I want you to realize that this is just a launching pad, this session, for what you can do moving forward. Raise your hand if we're all in agreement that that that's what we're here for? Good. Because you're going to do an evaluation, and I want to make sure I don't have any zeros that say he didn't teach me anything, so I can go ahead and make all my kids have straight A's. So, this is the question I pose for you. What makes a great teacher? Because this lays the groundwork, like I said, for all the steps that follow. All right? Now, once again, technology being an issue, they had a clicker and it's gone now, so I got to keep coming back to the laptop here. I recently read a really profound article in Education Week, and they talked about it here, saying mastery of the subject matter, designing coherent lesson plans, tracking student improvement, yada yada. We all know that stuff. That is definitely a competent teacher. But what makes a great teacher beyond this? And as the teacher, being that I, the teacher that I am, great, I'm like waiting for some hands. What do you think? Caring about the kids. Patience. Inspiring them. Passion. These are all great words. Enthusiasm. Exactly. Connecting. A constant learner. Yeah, a learner for life. This is what the quote finishes with. I highlighted the things that this author wanted to show as being extremely vital to the teaching profession. It's about building relationships, inspiring, engaging, building that trust with the students, especially when we're going to be talking about students from different cultures. Trust is so important, a sense of caring for those individuals, those students. I like that concept of human improvement. That's pretty powerful. Great teachers are no less than our friends, mentors, and role models. It's what it's about. That's why we do what we do. There are a few people that are like, oh, I love to go ahead and crunch numbers and do assessments and get into Power School and all these systems, and then there's the rest of us that are like, I just want to inspire. Right? You get a few of those people that are like, oh, I just love that stuff. The rest of us are like, we're here to make a difference. That's why I do what I do. This is where we're at with this workshop. The nuts and bolts of content for lesson plans, the nuts and bolts for curriculum, we're barely going to scratch the surface on that. So does everybody understand? Raise your hand if you understand that as far as this workshop goes. Great. So let's go and dive right into the steps now. First one, before I put it up there, there's an anecdote behind it. So I was in Beijing teaching a leadership seminar, and there's a student named Barry. And Barry, he was a great kid. You know, one of those students that are just so full of curiosity, and they're eager to learn. They're just wanting to soak everything up. And he was so interested in learning English, learning about Western culture, and he was always asking questions, sometimes to the point where it was kind of annoying. It's like, tone it down a little bit, Barry. Take a break, take a breath. We were doing this activity, and he was the last to go. We were looking at axioms, proverbs, words of wisdom, and he's great when he's one-on-one, but then when he gets in the group setting, he gets a little bit flustered. He gets nervous. Right? So he went up to the board, and he wrote his axiom down. Okay? And this is what he meant to write. We probably all heard this. Right? When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. I love this axiom personally, for myself, because it always makes me remember, really, if you think about it, for me this means all the resources, the mentors, all the tools are at your disposal if you're ready, if you're motivated, if you want to make it happen. But Barry, because he was flustered, he's learning English, he put this up. He said, when the teacher is ready, the student will appear. You know, the students had heard the one before. They kind of snickered and laughed a little bit. I kind of tried to redirect, you know, using classroom management, redirect the students back onto task, all that sort of stuff. He was the last one to present, so he rewrote it, kind of scratched it out, but it stayed on the board. The students left, and I looked at it, and I saw it again, and I said to myself, you know what? That is an accent. And I want to use that. Because if you think about it, the teacher cannot exist unless you have students. And you don't earn the right to the title of being a teacher until you make your students feel like they're students. You show them that what you provide them in your instruction, the way you deliver that instruction, the curriculum that you provide them with, the interactions you have with them and their family, that's when you have a true student. And then therefore, you are a teacher. Otherwise, you're the people that are in front of the class that get busy work. You're just an adult that watches kids. And we all know people at our schools or previous schools that do that. And it just tears you up inside. Because you think, man, those students, they're not getting the education that they deserve. And so this kind of sets the tone for us with that great teacher mindset that we started with. Also, just a little bit after I had this interaction here with Barry, I saw an article. This is about 2009. And Felder and Brent came out with some research, and they looked at 10 worst teaching mistakes that you can make. I'm an asset-based thinker, not a deficit-based thinker. But, you know, you think of that article, you're doing research, you see it, and you're like, oh, I don't need to look at that, I don't make those mistakes. Maybe we'll just take a peek and see what those other teachers, but maybe they struggle with. So you look at it, you know, which I did, and I noticed that three of the top five directly related to this idea of earning your right to be a teacher. Didn't really have to do with mastery of content or, you know, subject matter or anything like that. And I want to show them to you. First one. This is number 5. Failing to establish relevance. This is the question I have to ask for you guys. Are you a trust me teacher? Does anybody know what that means, a trust me teacher? You know what it means?
Assuming it's when you tell somebody, just do it this way because just trust me, it's going to work.
Exactly. How many of you have seen a teacher or caught yourself or had a teacher that when you were younger and they came up to you and they said, you know what? Just do this work, trust me. Or you'll thank me later when you're older. That's their idea of building relevancy for the instruction. I'm older, I'm wiser, you'll learn this later and you'll tell other kids the same thing when you're an adult. Is that really going to motivate our students? Number 3, getting stuck in a rut. Are you a fossilized teacher? The dinosaur teacher. I always like using fossils when I teach even English language learning, fossilization, things like that. It's such a vivid word, the imagery. When you think of a fossil, think of dinosaurs. You're stuck. You know, you're in the earth, buried deep, and you can't move. And there's teachers in our schools that are that way. I remember my first assignment. Across the hall there was a teacher. I'm not going to say any names or subjects or other things that they did at the school. Filing cabinet. I'm going to show my age here. There were no, projectors to do your lessons on, or those smart boards or anything. You had to use the overhead projectors. And this teacher had a filing cabinet. And every morning when I come in, I'd always check and say, hopefully he doesn't do the same thing. But he did. You hear it open, shh, go in there. September 3rd week. In that same file cabinet, there was in front of it, September week 2. Behind it, September week 3. Put it on his desk. Have his coffee or whatever. 5 minutes before the kids came in. Put that on the overhead. What was the content of that class? What was the structure? 15 minutes, there was an assignment the kids used the overhead with, independent work. Come into class, get started. So 15 minutes, boom, bam, those are out of the way. And this is the way I know this teacher thought. 20 minutes, we open up the book, chapter 3 is the next chapter, so we're gonna do chapter 3. I lecture for 20 minutes, and then the last 15 minutes, they do chapter review questions. Every day. I take that back, 90% of the time. The other 10%, what do you think it was? A video. That's a rut. It was hard. I was just thinking, oh my goodness. There's so many current events, things going on. How can we not include those in the curriculum? The number one thing was disrespecting the students. And I think it's pretty obvious. The way I describe that one is, are you a my way or the highway kind of a teacher? You have no ability to be in the gray, if you will. Meaning that sometimes you got to roll with it. I had an amazing administrator at one of the international schools I worked with. Students were always complaining about professional development, such as this, for the teachers and the staff, faculty, and said, why do you guys always get to miss days and go learn stuff? And you guys always come back and you seem so energetic. Because at that time, we were able to go to a nice resort and have it there, and the teachers were really happy, but the content was really, was quite good. It was good stuff that we could really sink our teeth into and use. And the kids were like, you always come back and it's always so great. And the kids just threw out, why can't we have one for us? And from that spurred the student council, visiting with administration and a few teachers, and the creation of a student development day came. Teaching students things that the classroom can't have, or there is no time for. All the stuff that we want to do, right? How many of us have that list where you have all the things, the standards you got to meet? All those requirements, and then below that there's like this dotted line and all the stuff that you really want to get to about making a difference in the kid's life, but you're always stuck on the top and you never make it to those bottom things because you're just trying to make it through the top stuff. You know, teaching students outside of the classroom opportunities for community service, leadership, all that sort of stuff so they become better people. It's not easy to fit that in when they're a grade or 2 grade levels behind. But it's still important that they learn those things. We incorporated a student development day. It was great. Students thought of it. Boom, it was there. That was a prime example of going ahead and respecting students and listening to them and putting value in what they share. Sometimes that's all it takes to start developing relationships with the kids. Here's a nice comic. Shows what happens when we don't. Just trust me, guys. You'll get the comic. Trust me. Step 2. This is going to require us to look within ourselves. Everything that we're going to do when it comes to multicultural classrooms starts within the individual. Before you can ever learn about somebody else and their culture and their background knowledge and everything that they bring as a person, you have to do that self-evaluation first. It's not always easy. Sometimes we think we already know that information, but really, there's a lot to be learned in that process. It's kind of like journal writing, right? We go, I know everything that I did today. I know all the stuff that happened, and then we write it down, and then we look at it and reflect upon it. We see it on paper, just a different modality, and all of a sudden it has different meaning, or it has more significance. So when we start the process of self-evaluation, that's where we really will begin to take off and accelerate this process of building multicultural classrooms. So, how do we do this? The idea is perceptions too. George Spindler, an anthropologist, put it so well. He says that learning about your own culture is like making the strange familiar. Think about that. You're basically having to stop and evaluate your habits. Things that you do subconsciously. the way you think, the way you act, right? All these sort of things that you just do naturally that you might not even realize. That sort of stuff isn't easy to do. You have to stop and be very cognizant of that process. And it's really important when we get it back to the classroom now, because you don't realize this sometimes, or we don't realize this because sometimes I'm in that same boat. But what we do, the way that we carry and conduct ourselves in the classroom, it has dramatic effects on the climate and the dynamics of that classroom. Little decisions that we make, little things that we say, ways that we group certain students or tell certain students to do their work, or we say we're going to make accommodations, but are they the type of accommodations that are going to help them or make them feel like, okay, I'm different and therefore am I of the same value as the other kids in the classroom? All those sort of decisions starts by first saying, okay, this is who I am, this is what I think about these sort of things, and okay, now I'm going to see how I utilize that in the classroom, because we all bring our personality to the classroom. Right? We all do different things. I'm right now working with a charter school, and there's this guy who online school. He's amazing at doing videos. He does all these videos where he dubs over voices, and he has these cartoons and all this sort of stuff, and the kids just love it. And then there's another teacher who's like, I really don't like to do video editing. I'd rather just do very personable YouTube videos where it's just me and it's like a conversation. Those are very distinct personality types. Right? We bring those personalities to the classroom. We got to make sure that we understand how we're using it with our students. The other thing that we have to understand is that there's some terms that relate to cultural competency. That's a process of learning, sensitivity towards culture, understanding of other cultures. It really relates to anthropology and sociology, the way that people live. There's some terms here that I wrote down that are very important. That first one is ethnocentrism. It's the idea, putting it bluntly, it's the idea that my culture is the best culture because it's mine. And so therefore, I do things this way, and why don't other people do it that way? Okay? But it really is saying that we construct meaning through our lenses, our personal lenses, the way we see things. And so the idea is that this is the way things are done for me, and so therefore, kind of like, don't other people do it that way too? Because I don't think I like to believe nobody does it maliciously. They're going to do it my way because this is the way it's supposed to be done, and no buts about it. The other one is the naive realism. That's taking it to the next level of that naive piece. You really just have no understanding of the other things that are going on, and so what you see through your eyes is truth. That you aren't thinking of other people's perspectives. Okay? So when I see something and I stop and I say, well, that person could be having a bad day. I don't know their experience. Maybe somebody passed away in their family. Maybe there's some domestic violence in that that situation. When I take that approach, that's where it's not naive. That's where I'm looking at other people's point of view. The naive realism is where you lack that piece. You're just saying, oh, I see this, and so therefore it's cut and dry. This is the situation. It becomes very difficult to live in a world like that. And then we'll look at stereotyping and discrimination through a video that I have here. But I just want to share with you guys that the truth of those two words, they kind of seem like they're ugly and dirty words, but they're really not, if you stop and think about it for a second. Because you're like, oh, people stereotype, that's a bad thing. You don't want to discriminate against other people, stuff like that. The reality is they're tools that the mind uses to conceptualize and to make things simple. So, for example, stereotyping. Stereotyping is the mind's way of grouping and categorizing objects, ideas, and people. But what happens is when we have people as our primary focus, the mind wants to oversimplify it, so therefore we start putting people in categories very quickly instead of knowing what the individual likes to do or learning about their personal story. We just go, oh, they look like this, or they do this sort of thing, they go in this category. And that's where it becomes troublesome. Discrimination is also similar for the mind in processing. It's distinguishing or differentiating between ideas. So you see this thing and you see this thing over here and you go, okay, I'm going to compare and contrast. But the no-no with that is when we start putting values and say, this is more valuable than this, especially when it's people or culture. This is more valuable than this one. And that's where it gets to be troublesome. So there's this video here I want us to look at that talks about these concepts. Let me see here. I wanted to have this in a different setting, so let me see if I can get this. Cool, here we go. Check, take a look at it. I couldn't embed it. It's from Vanderbilt University. They don't allow it, nor do they allow it to be maximize the size, so this is all we got. Maybe I can, there we go. Use the function on the computer, but they don't allow it.
Listen, as the words appear on your screen, what thoughts or images come immediately to mind?
Hold on.
Jot down a few notes about your first impressions. Continue watching for further reflection. English language learner. Cheerleader. Student living in poverty. Student with a disability. Honor roll student. School bully. Prom queen and king. Now that you've written down some first thoughts, let's dig a little deeper into those impressions. We like to think that when we look at the world, we see it objectively. We tend to think reality is exactly what we see, that it exists in the order and detail in which we see it. But how neutral are we when we look at the world around us? A moment ago, you listened to a list of words, and it's likely that some impressions or images came into your mind. Language is an abstraction that we attempt to convert into something simpler to understand, a concrete thought or picture that we can make sense of. What pictures leapt to mind when you heard those words? Were there several? Was there just one? When you heard English language learner, did you see this? Or this? What about cheerleader? Is this what came to mind? Or was it something like this? What about student living in poverty? Did you see this? Or perhaps this image is what occurred to you. We don't always like to acknowledge it, but our perceptions can sometimes be influenced by stereotypes. A cognitive and social mechanism, a stereotype is what we call the human mind's tendency to simplify people or groups into a narrow range of characteristics, habits, or reactions. But these types of perceptions are often inaccurate, leading us to oversimplify or to unfairly categorize others. People are more complex than that. People are more diverse. So when you heard the words student with a disability, did you see this? Or this? What about honor roll student? School bully? Prom queen and king? names come to mind? All people stereotype, because stereotyping is a natural function of how the human mind perceives the world. But our minds also have the ability to understand that function, to realize that it is happening, and through reflection, reconsideration, and careful self-examination, we are able to mitigate the worst effects of this tendency that we all share.
And then it's like, hush. All right. And this other screen. No way around that, I apologize. We try to work on that at the beginning. Additionally, Pacific University has a nice module or set of modules in their international studies, their College of International Studies, that talks about these sort of topics. One of them is In the Mind of the Beholder. And by the way, I will give you guys access to this PowerPoint and all the resources that I talk about at the end. I have a website. I'll give you guys access code to my work, and you guys can look at all of it. I have probably 15 to 18 websites, so if you're looking at like the research where I give citations and all that, you don't need to scurry to write that down. I provide all of them as links, my website, so you can get access to that. So I want you to focus. I should have mentioned that earlier. I apologize. I want you to focus your time now on ideas that come to mind for the classroom and for projects and different ideas of that nature. So there's this module that they do that's called In the Mind of the Beholder. And it's really cool because what it does is it gives you these scenarios to look at between at least two people, but it can be groups, it can be done in groups. And what it does is it tells you to look at it and see if the way that you see it, the way that you construct meaning through your lens, is the same as another person. And they use a lot of cultural norm type of items. So for example, they have one that says, you see somebody kicking a dog. Well, if you come from a very, I would say from a social class standpoint, a higher social class order, you're used to animals being pets that you take care of. A lot of people have them as family members. That's a big deal, right? That's like animal cruelty. But then if somebody from another culture sees it and says animals have diseases, dogs are, they're all stray. We kick dogs all the time. Then there could be this disconnect. That's one of the examples. Another one is time and space. Like for example, with Latinos, I'm Latino, so the idea of coming late, right? People always know, oh yeah, you come late. This idea of time not being as important, it's okay to kind of stroll in. Well, it's sitting people down this activity and saying, this is what happens when I observe that, this is what I feel or what I think. And then the other person is saying, well, when I do that or when I see that, this is what I think, what I see and I think. So basically you have a cultural divide and you see people's behaviors. And there's always going to be two types. There's going to be somebody that does the action, the doer, and then you're going to see somebody that sees it, the observer. And so our goal is to always make sure that the doers are in alignment with their thinking and what they see. Their lenses are in alignment with the observer. Otherwise, we have issues. A lot of times we see the issue with Latino parents, and we say, well, people say they don't care. They don't care about education. They're not involved. What's wrong? That's the observer side. But do we let the doer side give some explanations? Yeah, there's going to be some people that, just like in any culture, that don't care. We have those, unfortunately, we have those parents. But then you're going to see other situations and scenarios evolve when you find out information and you dig deeper, like the video says. So keep that in mind. So we're now going on to the next level. We're learning about our own culture. What I want us to do now is to look at culture by itself as a concept. And I say culture is like an iceberg. Use a simile as a metaphor, a simile to be specific. What do you think I mean when I say culture is like an iceberg? Why would I use that? That image, that example. Yeah, we all, it's what you can see is just that bit above the surface, but there's always so much more below, right? It's right on. So when we look at it, this is what we see, because we want to have things, the brain wants to process in images, make it simple. So this is what we see. We see the food, the dress, the music, you know, all the celebrations, all that sort of stuff comes out. Very common. But what about these items? Notions of modesty, conception of beauty, ideals, government, politics, child raising, definition of sin, cosmology, relationships with animals, working patterns, those dynamics between superior, subordinate, how they interpret humor, how they hold their elders in what regard, body language, eye contact. There's so many things that we need to know before we can start truly understanding the students and the families we work with. Okay. So now what we do, we've already started looking at ourselves internally. We're also at the same time learning about culture and the constructs. That's what that basically was, the constructs that make up culture. At a superficial level, and then digging deeper. The next step is to then, what I say here, is to look at how we measure it, okay? And so there's this concept of CQ. If you're familiar with that, it's down there, it says a Cultural Intelligence Center. Cultural Intelligence Center is an organization that they've trademarked it, although I've seen it by other groups, but they've trademarked the term, so they actually own it. It's this idea, just like an IQ, that you understand cultures at what level. So you can actually measure that. And what their website says is that it will provide you with insights, of how they use the term cope. I don't know if that's the best word, but to cope with multicultural situations, engage in cross-cultural interactions, and perform in culturally diverse work groups. So they think that if you build the IQ, that you're going to be able to do these things. They continue to say that you're going to be able to have these really deep and rich interactions in several social contexts. And this is what they say is the most important thing, that it's malleable, meaning that you can grow it, you can improve it. Okay? That's the important thing, is that if you don't score so high, or you don't know very much, it doesn't take too much effort to get that score up. Right? I provide a link with the information at the end. It will show you some assessments, some inventories that you can take to see what your CQ is. It starts with simple questions. Just if you want to know, questions like, how do you feel when you're around other cultures? You know, things where people go, oh, I feel great. You know, where it then goes down to the next level, and it says, what do you know about the marital practices of other cultures? And then it'll go down to the next level. Do you find that you are able to, in certain situations where culture comes up, you're able to find ways of understanding those cultures, or bringing groups together from different backgrounds so that they can interact in harmony? So it kind of takes you level by level through, and you score it and you determine. You just got to be honest with yourself, like all self-assessments, questionnaires, and then you'll know. They also provide you with resources for building that up. There's lots of information if you just Google CQ or cultural intelligence, and there's many resources available. So once we get that, then what I think is important is start talking about identity. Because this is where you get to the individual now. So what we just did was we got everything about ourselves, and then we started these, if you will, if we're not careful, these sweeping generalizations, right? Because you're like, okay, we learned about culture, so I learned that this is what Latinos do, or I learned that people from Africa do these things. But now, once we have that, it's that schema, right? It's that background knowledge of that culture, then we go in and we build a relationship, instead of the reverse. We try to build a relationship, and the students are like, I don't connect with you. You don't understand me. Or you're saying that. I don't understand these parents or this situation. It's very confusing. It's hard. So now this is the order. You go ahead and go in, and now you build the relationships. You're armed. You have an arsenal. It's still not going to be easy, especially if you're with adolescent boys. Not going to be easy, especially if you're female. I heard a female chuckle. It can be tough. I've seen it. But the idea is that with that arsenal, then you start developing the relationships. You find out their identity. And the identity is so important, because when we find identity with our students, that's when we can build purpose in the classroom. Because the purpose in the classroom is their purpose for life. Right? We want to help guide students to be lifelong learners. We want to guide students to be professionals. That's the ultimate goal. Even if you're teaching kindergarten, your ultimate goal is getting them, in my mind, to college or some form of higher education. I know not college isn't for everybody, but you have to have something beyond a high school diploma now to be viable in this country. So the idea is that you help them find that purpose by knowing their identity. And this is really huge when you have people that are maybe refugees, people that they're immigrants, right? So they don't really connect necessarily with their ancestors, their parents, their grandparents, but yet they don't connect with mainstream America, and they're sitting here and they're saying, I don't know what to do. Do I do what they're doing? Do I do what they're doing? I'm being tugged in all directions, and I'm gonna just go ahead and do this. And that's usually something negative. Getting into trouble, making bad choices. So here's a great tool. It can be used for adults or kids. I use this all the time when I work with kids. Build your identity role. I want to know who you are. These are the simple facets of that. This is sort of the top of the iceberg, if you will. We're looking at the person, their family, their ethnic makeup, their gender, age, religion, education, other. You can put whatever you want, hobbies, their interests, things like that. This is telling us right off the bat who you are. Now, this is what they're probably going to give you. But in the process of building the relationships and the rapport with the kids, this is what you need to be investigating. The Child Well-Being Index. I don't know if you're familiar with this. There's 25 components to it. It's broken into 7 categories. These are the things that aren't going to be so easy to get out of the kids. This side over here, they'll share. They'll say, yeah. I have 2 siblings. I have a brother and a sister. Over here, the family economics. You're not going to have students say, yeah, I come from a poor family, we don't have any money. They don't want to share that. But it's our job to know that, to recognize that. So these areas of family economics, emotional or spiritual well-being, their social relationships, community engagement, education attainment, safe, risky behavior, their health, all those are important for us to find out, because if those things are out of whack, then in the classroom things are going to be out of whack. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to solve all those problems. It means that you just need to recognize those and find ways, and this is where the key word comes in, to accommodate those students. Accommodation is a very strong word. It's a very lethal word because people interpret it different ways. When I say accommodate, I mean things like if you notice that a student struggles to stay awake in class because they're taking care of 3 siblings at home because their parents work until midnight, or they work the graveyard shift, there's some accommodations that can be made there. Things that are out of our students' control, we need to accommodate for those things, right? Very nice tools. I provide you guys with some worksheets that have those. If you want more on the Child Well-Being Index, which I recommend, the Foundation of Child Development has that information. It's good stuff. The 2013 report is already out, so you can look at that. It's pretty up to date. So, moving on here now, let's start getting into some ideas of what the idea of multicultural classrooms is. And they use the term, often researchers, culturally responsive or culturally relevant classrooms. That's the language they use. So how do we build those? How do we create those? Well, the first idea that I throw out here is that you got to develop core relationships, and then you'll be able to provide core relationship learning. So that means you define, it's all about definition. People know the roles. The teacher knows the role of the student knows the role of the teacher. They know the role, the relevancy of the subject matter and what's going to be taught and what's going to be learned, and they're going to know how to interact in a manner that everybody can get along, be successful. The idea, this is the most common one when you say to appreciate, you validate. I'm only going to touch on this just for a second, as you hear this all the time. You need to validate and appreciate the culture. It's true, right? But I'm just going to touch on it here because we know that. So make sure that you find cross-cultural learning opportunities. When you learn about the cultures, when you learn about the identity, that's when you can start saying, you know what, I know Carlos over here, he really likes this aspect of it, and I know that over here, little Juan, he likes it too. So this lesson I'm going to prepare is going to be with them in mind, and I'm going to go ahead and have this. Now I know the girls are going to put up a little bit of a fight, but it's going to be good for them to learn this material too. That sort of idea comes into play. You observe preferred task orientations. That's really important. And then those accommodations. I touched on that. I'm not going to rehash it. You just notice things that are happening. If students need a little bit more time, you help them, give them more time, things like that. I'm really big on language registers. I'm sure you're familiar with that term, the registers, right? The way that you conduct yourself in different settings by the way that you talk or you write. So if you're with friends, you have a certain way that you talk and act. When you're with teachers as a student, you have certain ways that you talk and you act. And I feel it's, and I teach secondary, you can tell when I teach. I'm teaching kids to say, for example, when you go and ask a teacher for a letter of recommendation, you don't go in and you go, hey miss, please do this, do it, or not even please. Miss, do this. And you're saying, you're asking them to take the time, their personal time, to probably spend at least an hour and write your letter of recommendation, and you're going to ask them like that. There's a protocol, there's a register. You need to go in, miss, you have a moment, can I speak with you? No, I don't have any time. Okay, is there a time that's convenient? Can I get back in here maybe at lunchtime? Those sort of conversations, our kids don't always know how those are conducted. And it stems from the fact that they're not able to have that role modeling. They're not able to observe that in the home or in other settings. And so that's one of those learning opportunities that we have, is to teach them those registers. I scratched the surface on this, but I'm big on multiple intelligences. I know that there's not a lot of hard concrete data on it, but those of us that use it, we believe in it. When you use multiple strategies in the classroom, it's going to connect with more kids. It's casting a wider net. You're going to catch more of the fish. Right? So I always try to find ways to incorporate all those different multiple intelligences in students' learning. This is great. I had an administrator that explained this to us in an in-service one time this way, and I always hold on to it. It says, see teaching as pulling knowledge, extracting the knowledge out of the kids versus pushing it in, putting it in, cramming it in. They already have it. Now, do they know the nuts and bolts? That's the key term I used earlier. The specifics, those standard items that are like very, very specific. Well, no, but they know a lot more than what sometimes we allow them to share. So when we pull the learning out, when we allow them to do it themselves, one, that's the validation piece. They feel good about themselves with self-esteem. But secondly, we're teaching them ways of learning where they can do it independently. because that's the bottom line, is that students need to understand how to be critical thinkers, be logical in the way that they get things done, being good decision makers, and they don't need to, I'll just say it this way, they don't need somebody to hold their hand or spoon feed them. Because sometimes students say, can you help me with this question? Can you help me with this question? And you haven't even read it yet. You're telling me, you haven't read the question yet. How do you know you need my help? Take a look at it and see, and what are some strategies, some ideas that you can use, that sort of language. When we say pulling knowledge out, I think that's a great example of how we can give them ownership of their learning. Lastly, the high expectations. Especially when students from different backgrounds come in. Sometimes I told you they see them and they see themselves as not being equal to their peers. And sometimes we don't realize it, but by making accommodations, there are different standards. I'm not saying anybody does that maliciously. I've caught myself on a few times doing that. And I said, no, I need to hold them all to a standard. They're all going to be held to this expectation. And if they struggle in the process to try to reach that level, that's where I come in and I help. But I don't make the assumption that they can't do it before they even are allowed to try. That's where we got to be careful. But Calvin, from Calvin and Hobbes, he's a different story. That's also letting them know the expectations and defining the roles. Okay. I'm really big on my classroom being like a home. It's a safe haven. It's really important when students love their classroom, they're in there and they want to hang out. If you're a teacher where the kids always come to your room at lunchtime, or if there's recess or something like that and they all want to go, you're a good teacher. Sometimes you complain about it, you go, oh man, why do they always come to my room? It's because you care. It's because you're welcoming and you're inviting. Because they all run the opposite direction of the teacher that doesn't do that. They want to be in that classroom as little as possible. They don't want to be there. How do we do that? How do we make that room warm and welcoming? First thing I always do, like I said, I want kids to know exactly where I come from. There's got to be routine. Right? You got to let them know that there's this process.